TRT World's defense analyst Oubai Shahbandar joins me now for more on this story. So thank you for coming in. Daesh has lost ground in Syria and Iraq on the same day in Deir Ezzor and Qaim. Why are these losses important?
Well, it's really important to note here that Daesh has lost nearly 95% of its overall territory. Now, if we remember, just 3 years ago, Daesh controlled nearly a third of Iraq and over 40% of Syria. So it really was able to control a mini administrative state and had millions of people under its control. As of this morning, Daesh's territory is dwindling to a small fraction to what it once held, with only a few thousand civilians still trapped in the areas that it controls today. So this is a major development.
So what does it really mean strategically, and what ground does it still control?
Well, that's a very important question, because just because Daesh doesn't control the amount of territory that it once controlled doesn't mean that it's still not a threat. Daesh is still able to launch car bombs, as we just saw this morning in Baghdad. It's still able to launch sneak attacks, guerrilla-style attacks against Iraqi forces, against the forces on the ground fighting it in Syria and eastern Syria and along the lower Euphrates River Valley. So Daesh could still potentially be a threat and could still potentially re-emerge just because it doesn't control the towns and villages that it once that it just lost in the following few months, since the coalition offensive on the Iraqi side and on the Syrian side really seemed to make some major advances on the ground.
And now that the fight against Daesh is nearly over, we can say, I think, what will it mean for the future of Syria and Iraq? Because so many countries are involved in this battle. Well,
it's important not to declare mission accomplished early here. You know, just because Daesh has physically been defeated on the battlefield, there are still many unresolved issues on the ground. You still have hundreds of thousands of displaced Syrians and Iraqis that have nothing to go back to. Their homes have been destroyed. Their towns have been ransacked. There are still unresolved deep political fractures in Syria and in Iraq that leads to major questions on, well, how do we resolve these issues?
Apart from the civilians, first of all, what will it mean for the countries who are involved in this battle, like Iran, Russia, and Turkey and US?
Sadly, the civilians are always the first to bear the brunt of the fight here, and always the first to suffer. As we have Syrian forces moving towards the Iraqi side, as we have the Iraqi forces moving to the Syrian border, and militias on both sides. You have the SDF and the PYD, which is, of course, the Syrian version of the PKK, fighting alongside American special forces, who are also coming down. They're all converging along the same front lines, yet we still have thousands of civilians that are in need of care, are in need of humanitarian care. It doesn't seem that there is an overarching international solution to the civilian problem. Thousands, by the way, of civilians are also disappearing. While Daesh committed some horrendous war crimes against civilians, some of these militias that are controlling these towns after Daesh leaves are potentially just as bad. We've spoken to civilian activists on the Syrian and on the Iraqi side who are worried about their fate and the fate of their families even after Daesh is defeated. So you may have one calamity here replaced by yet another one, sadly.
So, for example, the Iraqi Prime Minister Deir Ezzor said the town was taken in record time. I mean, what does that mean in the fight for civilians if it's taken in record time? Well, can they get out, or is there a place for them?
The Iraqi military had believed that the fight for Qaim would take months. Obviously, it did not take that. It took just a few short weeks. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this is a positive development for the civilians in this area. For example, let's take a look at what happened in Mosul. Many of the Iraqi-backed militias, and it's not just the Iraqi army, we have to remember, that is going into these towns fighting Daesh. There are also affiliated militias that are not under the total control of the Iraqi government. So many civilians have complained of abuses by the hands of these militias. Now, the positive development here is that if a town is taken from Daesh quickly, it just means that the civilian infrastructure more than likely is not going to be as destroyed as we saw in wide swaths of Mosul, as we saw in Raqqa. But it still means that there's still major underlying questions on human rights abuses that still have to be resolved on what happens after these towns are captured by Iraqi forces and their affiliated militias.
Well, Oubai Shahbandar, thank you for coming in, Dan, for that insight.